The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Hi, hello, good day, everybody. Welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. With you again this week, as usual, your faithful host, Melvin. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me. When I left you last week, and I must apologize, at least briefly, because when I left you last week, I ran the show a little longer than I generally run it. I try to stop the show right around the 60-minute point or right before. I ran a little long, though, and I ran a little long while I was making a sort of an emotional plea for what was going on. Now, it was Wednesday of last week, and we were expected to default just a couple hours after I got off the microphone, and I really felt like it was going to happen. For the first time in over 230 years, I felt like our country was about to default on our debt, which would have caused massive worldwide collapse. And, of course, essentially the only party pushing for that. I'm a bit partisan, obviously. I make no bones about that. I, on most issues, tend to lean more on one side than the other. That side would be the left side. Sorry, I've got a bleeding heart. It's what they call it. It's a medical condition. This time around, this wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing. It was a Tea Party thing. And that is about as nice as I'm ever going to be to that group. There are, with just about every political party that's active in America, I can find some things I agree with. Even libertarians. Libertarians, though I think you're by and large selfish and crazy, I am with you on drug policy and I am with you on prostitution. Just about every party I can find something I agree with. And would never say that I absolutely outright hate a party. Except for now. I hate the American Tea Party. I was driving down I-5. This was shortly after the default didn't happen. And there is a thing right about Rush Road. I think that's right around exit 83, and that works if you're heading north or south. And there's a sign there where it's got a picture of Uncle Sam on it, and the wording on it is constantly changed. It's a two-sided billboard, and it's got a message on either side. I'm not sure how often the guy changes it. It's probably weekly, but I drive I-5 quite a bit. And this last week, and this was after the collapse didn't happen, the sign said on one side, keep the government shut down. It balances the budget. No, it does not. Actually, it's a pretty good chance it would have actually collapsed it. But all of the Tea Partiers were really pushing for it. Now, we'll talk about the vote here in a little bit. I want to get to Obamacare first, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, the whole pushing us to the brink was supposedly over Obamacare, and had the government not been shut down, the Republicans and the Tea Partiers and all the rest could have really, really pushed the fact that the Obamacare rollout has been a little bumpy. Well, I guess that's being generous as well. It's been more than a little bumpy. There have been problems with the website. And so the speech the president gave a speech just a couple days ago. And on top of the website, which is healthcare.gov, he decided to add a phone number where people can call to sign up too. Now, with a project this large, and a lot of it going through a website, I mean, 30 years ago, we wouldn't even have had a website. It would have been all phone banking with live people. But fine. So with rolling out something this large, there's going to be, and it's a computer thing, there's going to be some glitches. Once again, being generous here. Healthcare.gov was only meant to be a portal. The large idea behind Obamacare was to expand Medicare in every state and then have these healthcare exchanges. It had all gone well. Essentially, 98% of people in America would have gotten healthcare. Healthcare.gov was only ever meant to be a portal. You go on, you say what state you live in, what area you live in, you give them your name. They send you off to your state's exchange or your state's expanded Medicare program. What happened when Obamacare went in front of the Supreme Court, though, was they said, yeah, it's legal because the government has the right to tax people, and there is a penalty in there if you don't buy health insurance. By the way, it's not really an enforceable penalty. It's not a penalty with a lot of teeth, even though a lot of the conservatives are screaming their guts out about how they're being made to pay for something that they didn't want to pay for. Somehow they think that the old healthcare system, the one that we are still currently in, that only charges you for what you get done. They forget about the fact that people get treated all the time, even though they can't pay for it. Fair enough. So it was only meant to be a portal. So when it goes in front of the Supreme Court says you can tax, but states are allowed to opt out. And that's what happened in a lot of red states. They decided to go ahead and opt out because they just hate the president. Quite honestly, there's no reason to opt out. It's not socialized medicine as it's being called all the time. Okay? But quite honestly, that's probably where we should have gone. The plan that the president picked, and I've mentioned this before, it's Romney Care, which is in place in Massachusetts. This was the heritage plan back in the 1990s that they wanted to implement to combat Hillary Care. So what do they all say? Nope. Now that it's Obama mentioning it, it's socialized medicine. Amy Goodman wrote an absolutely delicious piece with Dennis Moynihan that you can find over at democracynow.org, and it says, you know what? With the rollout, single payer really would have been best for us. A lot of us were pushing for getting single payer or at least getting a public option. The president, however, even turned down the public option. From the article, the for-profit health insurance industry in the United States is profoundly inefficient and costly, and a sane and sustainable alternative exists: single payer, otherwise known as expanded and improved Medicare for all. Just change the age of eligibility from 65 to 0. Dr. Steffi Woolhandler is a professor of public health at CUNY Hunter College and a primary care physician. She is a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School and the co-founder of Physicians for a National Health Program, or PNHP. PNHP is an organization with over 17,000 physicians as members advocating for single-payer healthcare system in the United States. So, what is single-payer? Critics denounce it as, here it is, throw up those quotes, the air quotes with your fingers. Critics denounce it as socialized medicine, while ignoring that single payer is already immensely popular in the U.S. as Medicare. A 2011 Harris poll found that Medicare enjoyed 88% support from American adults, followed closely by Social Security. Woolhandler explained that with a Medicare for All system, you could get a card the day you were born and you would keep it your entire life. It would entitle you to medical care, all needed medical care, without co-payments, without deductibles, and because it's such a simple system, like Social Security, there would be very low administrative expenses. We would save about $400 billion per year. Dr. Woolhandler went on, rather than thousands of different plans with tons of different co-payments, deductibles, restrictions, one single payer plan, which is what we need for all Americans, to give Americans the real choice of what they want, not the choice between insurance company A or insurance company B. They want the choice of any doctor or hospital like you get with traditional Medicare. Whether Obamacare is a pathway to get there is uncertain. as Dr. Woolhandler summed up, it's only a road to single payer if we fight for single payer. Yeah, if we who pushed the president, and by the way, Obama didn't walk into office and say, I'm changing everything about medical care. We, the people, pushed him in that direction. We said we don't like the current system. It's costly. It excludes a lot of people. If you're sick, you can't get insurance. If you get sick after you get insurance, no matter how long you've been paying on that insurance, you can be rescinded. It's a terrible system. And it's incredibly costly, even considering the fact that it doesn't cover everybody. Other countries pay wildly less than we do, and yet they cover all or almost all of their people. So, let us get to the shutdown, which I got wildly emotional about when we last spoke, or when you last listened to me. So, the government shutdown is dead, and Obamacare is alive. That is the headline over at HuffPo. The Senate voted 81-18, this was last Wednesday night, the 16th night, to reopen the federal government and raise the nation's borrowing limit just hours before the Treasury Department faced the possibility of being unable to pay all of America's bills for the first time in modern history. The House followed suit, voting 285 to 144 to end the latest damaging battle of divided government in a polarized Congress. Now, let me point something out. Boehner was constantly saying, every time he got in front of the television camera, every time he got on the mic, we just don't have the votes. We just don't have the votes. Well, how many votes do we need? I believe we needed somewhere between 217 and 221, and we got 285. That's the House. 144 against. And of course, at least 40 of those is the Tea Party caucus, and then 81-18 in the Senate. Obama signed the legislation early Thursday and said he would reopen the government immediately to lift this cloud of uncertainty and unease and start fixing the damage to the nation. I also want to point something else out. It's constantly pointed out to us by the conservatives. We can't have uncertainty. Businesses can't have uncertainty. They can't deal with uncertainty. They need to know what's coming up. Yeah, you're correct. They do. So don't shut down the government. All right, so Tea Party Republicans, led by Texas Senator Ted Cruz, demanded that the House of Representatives lock government funding in a chokehold unless the Democrats defunded the Affordable Care Act. Obama declaring that he would not negotiate over this law, the budget, or the debt while Republicans were holding hostages, and I'm glad that he did. Because had he debated with these terrorists, and I know I'm being hyperbolic right now, and I'm laying it on pretty thick, but had he negotiated with these guys, they would have done this every time they wanted something. And you don't encourage terrorism. You don't encourage hostage taking. So, it set up 16 days of furloughed federal workers, closed parks, halted safety inspections, and at an estimated loss of $24 billion in economic activity. Now, remember, this was all time, okay, these 3 weeks that the government was closed down. If the conservatives hated Obamacare so badly, they could have used those 3 weeks to point out the bumpy Obamacare rollout. And yet, they just had to get on the mic all the time and tell people, it's Obama's care, or Obama's fault. He shut down the government. He can't shut down the government. So, initially they told us it was going to cost, I believe, $1.5 billion a day. They said that it was going to, $300 million. Initially they said the government shutdown is going to cost $300 million a day. Well, it turned out to be quite a bit more than that. $24 billion in lost economic activity. And by the way, all those government workers that weren't working, they still got paid. Just like the shutdown that happened during the Clinton administration, after all the government employees came back, they got their back pay. So, Boehner and the Tea Party were finally forced to release their grip Wednesday by a bipartisan coalition in the U.S. Senate that said enough is enough. Boehner said, after finally waving the white flag, that the fight will continue. But there's another fight right around the corner. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell will fund the government through January 15th and extend the $16.7 trillion debt ceiling through February 7th. Okay? So there's your two dates to look out for. January 15th and February 7th. This fight will be coming up again. Right now there is a group, a budget committee that's putting together, I mean, they went right to work on that budget, which is great. After the government shutdown ended, they went right to work on that budget. So with a budget committee, Paul Ryan is on that budget committee. Paul Ryan, you know Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's he's essentially going to walk in the door and say, screw everybody. Cut everything. But not so fast. Bernie Sanders is also on that committee. Ladies and gentlemen, somebody is actually in that committee that is going to be fighting for us. Senator Bernie Sanders. If you have not heard of him, look him up. The man is delightful. When I heard all the polls about all the people saying, well, we want to fire every single member of Congress, I don't generally care for things like that. But when I heard people say that, the very first thing that came to my mind was, no, don't fire Bernie Sanders. He's actually good. But, knee-jerk reactions and all the rest. So what brought us / kept us at this point? This is October 13, 2013, so 3 days before the government was reopened. Representative Chris Van Hollen exposed how the House Republicans rigged the rules so that only Republican Majority Leader Eric Cantor or his designee can reopen the government, when normally any member of Congress could call that vote. So, Chris Van Hollen asked from the floor for a clarification on House Rule 12, Clause 4, which states, when the stage of disagreement has been reached on a bill or resolution with the House or Senate amendments, a motion to dispose of any amendment shall be privileged. He is then told by the Speaker pro tempore that the rule had been altered by the House. Pushing further, he is told that the House adopted House Resolution 368, passed on October 1st, the day of the shutdown. The resolution reads that any motion pursuant to Clause 4, Rule 12, relating to the House Joint Resolution may be offered only by the Majority Leader or his designee. That's right, they changed the rule so that only a Republican could reopen the House. They couldn't have a discharge petition, which, by the way, generally, if the votes were there, anybody could come up with a discharge petition and override the Speaker of the House. Mr. Van Hollen then clarifies, so, Mr. Speaker, just so I understand, and I quote, House Resolution 368 changed the standing rules of the House to take away from any member of the House the privilege of calling up the Senate bill to immediately reopen the government. He is then told in the affirmative. Why were the rules rigged to keep the government shut down? After being suspended by Speaker pro tempore, he offers, democracy has been suspended. So over that time, there were quite a few people, Tea Partiers by and large, that were just loving this, just singing and dancing in the streets. America was about to collapse, right? The fire was at our feet. They were about to level the country. They were so happy. And then they were led by the divine one himself, Ted Cruz. So Ted Cruz said over the weekend, the weekend before the government reopened, that he had prayed to God to guide him in the shutdown fight and was sure that his will be done, and I know it will be, quote unquote. Televangelist Pat Robertson opened Monday's edition of the 700 Club by describing the October 17th debt ceiling deadline as countdown to Armageddon. But Pat Robertson supported Cruz and the teabagger efforts, but conceded at the same time that a default on the U.S. debt would rocket around the world and mean chaos for every citizen. Before I go on, let me just say, praying to God for strength during the shutdown, which took children out of Head Start, right? And a lot of these children in Head Start, they come from very poor families, and the only meal they get, generally, is what they get at Head Start, right? So it cut unemployment, and it cut food stamps, it cut welfare, it cut all these things that help the poor. Though no longer a Christian, I do remember the Christian teachings in the less extreme churches that I went to. And if I remember correctly, you don't take food out of the mouths of starving people and then ask for God's guidance. Are you unfamiliar with your Bible? I would submit that you are. So, at the Values Voter Summit, CBN's David Brody spoke with Cruz about his role in instigating the government shutdown, which has been seen as complicating debt limit negotiations. Quote, "Where do you see God in all of this fight that's going on in your life right now?" Unquote. Brody asked the Texas senator. "Well, David, you know, at every stage my prayer to God is that his will be done," Cruz insisted, "as it will be." Fox News host Mike Huckabee, however, told Brody that Cruz had probably done more harm than good for the Republican Party. Huckabee also admitted that he is considering a run for president in 2016, which would see him facing off against Cruz in the Republican Party primary. So some folks decided to be helpers during the shutdown, right? Not all Republicans were obstructing or saying just burn the government to the ground and collect the insurance money. Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas proposed a solution for dealing with the threat of a government default. When asked whether he would allow the government to default on its debt, Gohmert projected the responsibility for such circumstances onto Obama. "No," he said, "that would be an impeachable offense by the president." Let me reiterate, the president didn't shut down the government. The president wanted to pay the bills. Democrats wanted to pay the bills. Most Republicans wanted to pay the bills. Nope, let's impeach the president. So when the government defaults because Republicans sat around and did nothing instead of raising the debt ceiling, they could impeach President Obama for obeying the law that they refused to change. So they would be blaming him for a crisis that they themselves created. The fallout. The fallout, even though we didn't go over the cliff, the fallout from this has been huge. China, in the midst of it, on Monday, October 14th, called for a de-Americanized world, upset that the fiscal brinksmanship in Washington is threatening the global economy. China called for the U.S. dollar to be replaced as the international reserve currency, as well for broader steps to create a quote-unquote de-Americanized world. Pardon me. China also called for an end to the pernicious impasse in the U.S. over raising the debt ceiling limit and ending the partial government shutdown, saying the world needed another reserve currency so nations could protect themselves from the spillover of the intensifying domestic political turmoil in the United States. China's been saying stuff like this for a long time, so in a sense, it isn't a big deal. But as the mess in Washington dragged on, more and more countries are going to be taking this idea more seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is watching, and when we do things like this to harm ourselves, that's it. I mean, at first, we're only hurting ourselves, but it will spread, and here's why. America is still the world's currency. 85% of trade around the world is still done in U.S. dollars. Whether countries need a place to stash or invest money, they buy U.S. treasuries. There's a number of socioeconomic things that make countries do this. But America has always been a safe investment because in our 230 plus years of being a country, we've always paid our bills. We've never defaulted. Never. Then the American Tea Party came along. Look, buying treasuries has been great for people, and it's been safe. People have looked up to America. I'm not going to say the light of the world, certainly, but something you could count on, right? But more and more, over our brinksmanship, they're saying, you know what? No. America is not the leader in too many things. We are conceding so much to the rest of the world right now. We've got a gigantic trade deficit. We don't make a lot of things here anymore, even though our manufacturing is starting to come back. I think quite a few factory owners and the rest are starting to see the drawback of making things in low wage countries. There's recalls. There's the fact that the money doesn't stay here. And Walmart recently mentioned that their profits are going down. And it's been speculated by more than a few economists, well, you don't pay your people anything. You take so much of the money you make and you send it straight to the top, and then you pay the people at the bottom very, very little. Eventually, no one's going to be able to buy your stuff. And another credit down rating. We're not out of the woods for this yet, but let me point this out. The Fitch credit rating agency has warned that it's reviewing the U.S. government's AAA credit rating for a possible downgrade, citing the looming deadline that happened last week to increase the nation's borrowing limit. Fitch is one of the three leading U.S. credit rating agencies, along with Standard & Poor's and Moody's. S&P downgraded U.S. long-term debt to AA in August 2011, you might remember, after the last debt fight. So, from the full press release from Fitch, Fitch Ratings has placed the United States on RWN, rating watch negative. Okay, in line with Fitch's previous statements, the RWN reflects the following key rating drivers and their relative weights. The U.S. authorities have not raised the federal debt ceiling in a timely manner before the Treasury exhausts extraordinary measures. Okay. The repeated brinksmanship over the U.S. debt ceiling also dents confidence in the effectiveness of the U.S. government and political institutions, and in the coherence and credibility of economic policy. It will also have some detrimental effect on the U.S. economy. Still quoting from the press release, the AAA rating reflects the U.S. strong economic and credit fundamentals, including its highly productive, diversified, and wealthy economy, extraordinary monetary and exchange rate flexibility, and the exceptional financing flexibility afforded by the global reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar and the depth and liquidity of domestic capital markets. Okay? In particular, the U.S. Treasury market, the U.S. sovereign credit profile also benefits from the respect of property rights, the rule of law, and a high degree of social stability. That is what's going away when we have these fights. So let's get to the polls, and the polls were not fair at all. I say not fair at all, but what I mean to say is the way that blame was spread was not equal on both sides, right? As much as they say, as much as most people would say, both sides are doing this, both sides are wrong. Well, actually, no. Allow me to remind you, the Democrats wanted to reopen the government. The president wanted to reopen the government. A lot of Republicans wanted to reopen the government. A new Pew Research Center survey released on Tuesday finds that more Americans blame Republicans, 46%, than the Obama administration, 37%. Pause for a minute. The president, okay, I've said it. I can't, oh my goodness, I can't say that. The president can't do this. Okay, he can't, alright, fine. For the deadlock in Washington over the government's shutdown and the debt limit. The net disadvantage for the GOP was roughly the same on a Pew Research survey conducted a week earlier, which found Republicans are more to blame by a 38% to 30% margin. These results differed from the NBC Wall Street Journal poll released last week that showed the public blaming Republicans by a wider 22-point margin, 53 to 31%. On the other hand, two recent polls show that if given the chance to individually rate how the main parties involved are handling the shutdown, majorities of Americans disapprove of everyone involved, but their disapproval of Republicans is the highest. In the HuffPost YouGov poll, 62% disapproved of Republicans in Congress, while 54% disapproved of Democrats in Congress, and 53% said the same of Obama. Moving on. 54% said that it's bad that Republicans control the House, one poll found. This is the CNN ORC poll. That's up from 43% in December 2012 during the last fiscal standoff. The figure is the first time that a majority thought Republican control was bad for the country since CNN started asking in December 2010, which is, of course, when they took over. Or when they won the election to take over. 63% of respondents want Boehner replaced. 63%. Pausing for a minute. So when he gets up there and he says, we're up here for the American people, we're doing what the American people want. Actually, you don't represent even kind of a majority. There, Boner. Let's see. 63% of respondents want Boner replaced, but by another Republican, which would not change GOP control of the House. Okay, the poll is yet another sign that the government shutdown has hurt the Republican Party. Okay, now I want to move on to this one. Okay, this is a good one right here. Okay, so this is the second part of the CNN poll. Okay. CNN had only released some of the results of their poll. Now they've released the second part, and boy, it is a doozy for the GOP. Okay, congressional Republicans are suffering in the wake of the government shutdown. 3/4 of Americans in a new national poll say that most GOP members of Congress don't deserve to be reelected. Okay. More than 7 in 10 questioned in the survey said that most members of Congress don't deserve to be reelected, with nearly 4 in 10 saying their own representative doesn't deserve a return ticket to Washington next year. Both figures are hovering around all-time highs in CNN polling. So, while the poll is good news, we are a long way from an election, and there's plenty of time to change this. But with the way we've been governing, from crisis to crisis to crisis, I think that it is highly unlikely. And with the Republicans screaming, even still, about Obamacare, something tells me they're not going to gain their focus. They're going to have focus, but it's not going to involve your interests. So, I want to mention one American weighing in on Obamacare. There have been quite a few, and I think a lot of people don't understand what the law means, because if they did, they wouldn't be freaking out about it. It's not the end of the world. It's not death panels. It's not any of these dumb things you've heard about. A sign outside Smokey Joe's Rib House in Rogers, Arkansas, claimed that Obamacare is, quote-unquote, America's punishment for slavery years. Oh, boy. Johnny Howard, who owns the restaurant, told 4029 TV the sign was up for just under an hour before it was removed because of several complaints from the public. Howard apologized for the sign and said that he did not intend for it to offend people. Allow me to pause just for a moment. Obamacare is punishment for slavery. Moving on. I didn't intend for it to be racist-oriented at all, Howard said. Okay. You shouldn't have mentioned slavery then. Fine. Howard isn't the first Obamacare opponent to invoke slavery while criticizing the health care law. Neurosurgeon Ben Carson said Obamacare is the worst thing to happen to America since slavery, while speaking at the 2013 Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago. Ladies and gentlemen, that is hyperbole. The fact that people can now buy health insurance or get free health insurance if they're poor enough, equating that with slavery, that's hyperbole. All right, so, Obamacare, and I'm quoting here, is really, I think, the worst thing that has happened in our nation since slavery, Carson said, and it is slavery in a way, because it is making us all subservient to the government. And it was never about health care. It was about control. Yiggity, 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 yikes. All right, I want to get to a couple of news stories here, if I may. The father of one student at Nathan Bedford Forrest High School in Jacksonville, Florida, started a petition that's gathered 157,000 signatures asking school board members to change the name of the school, which was chosen in 1959 by white civic leaders to protest court orders to integrate public education. Nathan Bedford Forrest, as you'll find out here in a minute, was a Klan Grand Wizard. And after schools began to integrate in 1959, naming this after the Klan Grand Wizard was a way to protest allowing blacks and whites to be educated together. This country really, for as much racism as still exists, we really have come a long way as a country. Duval County School Board members voted 5-2 in 2008 to keep the name. I know that's recent history. But Richmond noticed that none of the 5 members who voted with the majority currently served on the board. All 7 of the current board members have received a letter last month from traditionalist American Knights of the KKK asking them to not bow to pressure. One member said, when I found out it was an actual KKK organization, I wanted to burn the letter and wash my hands immediately. I love that quote. The group conceded that Forrest, Nathan Bedford Forrest, had been appointed the first Grand Wizard of the KKK and carried out his duties as the office demanded of him. The letter, which was signed by someone identifying themselves as Imperial Caltrop. Now, Nathan Bedford Forrest was accused of leading the 1864 massacre of black Union soldiers and white Union loyalists after they had surrendered at Fort Pillow, Tennessee. Another Nathan Bedford Forrest High School operates just south of Nashville, Tennessee. The school remained all white until 1966 when a small group of black students was allowed to enroll and mandatory integration began under federal court order in 1971. About 54% of the school current enrollment of 1,800 students is black. All right, so a little more news. Ken Cuccinelli is running for Virginia governor. We've been covering this, and we will be covering more and more of this as we get closer and closer to the election. Okay, now the Cooch, as he likes to be called, believe it or not, is losing. Here's the thing, though. This is an off-year election, which is already has pretty low turnout. Okay, which is why we can have in one election year, 08 or 12 or 2004, where we can have one party's president elected, and then 2 years later, in what they call the off-year election, have Congress flip to the opposite party. Because the same people that turned out 2 years ago don't necessarily turn out for these off-year elections. So, voting is already down in off-year elections. But that's not good enough for the Cooch, because he's pretty sure that he's still going to lose. So what does he want? Well, he wants voters' names stripped from the voter rolls. He wants less people to turn out, and he wants their names stripped. So, unfortunately, that was held up. U.S. District Court Judge Claude Hilton has denied a request by the Virginia Democratic Party to reinstate the names of 38,000 Virginia voters who have been purged from the voting rolls in that state. According to the Washington Post, the lawsuit stemmed from an anti-voter fraud program, sometimes known by the shorthand cross-check, that allows officials in the states that use it to compare voter rolls and weed out those who are registered in more than one place. This year, the program flagged more than 300,000 names, and the state forwarded more than 57,000 of those to local election officials for further review and possible removal. In the lawsuit filed in federal district court in Alexandria, the Democratic Party alleged that the program was rife with error, citing 3 examples of Virginians who were improperly removed from the voting rolls. This purge has taken place within weeks of the election for governor and other state offices in Virginia. According to the Washington Post, some local election officials have indicated that they were given insufficient time to research the names. Loudoun County Register Judy Brown said in an interview that she had to race to meet her local electoral board's deadline, which was 1 week. The legal advisor, now dig this. The legal advisor for the Virginia Board of Elections is none other than Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, the Republican candidate for governor. Cuccinelli's office filed paperwork with the court in support of the Board of Elections. Doesn't this seem to be a huge conflict of interest? See, it is his office that filed the papers. His office that is fighting to have those names removed. If he wins, this seems to be the only way that he's going to win. Now, during the government shutdown, obviously all the news was just government shutdown. So many other things got ignored, pushed to the side. And this is one of those things that I want to point this out because this absolutely went just about under everybody's radar. And it's unfortunate because these things seem to be happening with some frequency. Okay, over 20,600 barrels of oil fracked from the Bakken Shale has spilled from a Tesoro Logistics pipeline in Tioga, North Dakota, in one of the biggest onshore oil spills in recent history. Though the spill occurred on September 29th, the U.S. National Response Center, tasked with responding to chemical and oil spills, did not make the report available until October 8th, due to the government shutdown. The center generally makes such reports available on its website within 24 hours of their filing. Okay, so at more than 20,600 barrels, equivalent to 865,200 gallons. The spill was bigger than the April 2013 ExxonMobil Pegasus pipeline spill, which spewed 5,000 to 7,000 barrels of tar sands bitumen into a residential neighborhood in Mayflower, Arkansas. So far, only 1,285 barrels have been recovered in North Dakota, and the oil is spread over a 7.3 acre landmass. Okay, so Chris Roberts, environmental geologist for the North Dakota Department of Health Division of Water Quality, told the Williston Herald the leak was caused by a hole that deteriorated in the side of the pipe. Here's the thing. And Keystone right now is a big issue. So a lot of Tea Partiers, it's by and large them, wants the Keystone XL pipeline, which will carry tar sands oil from Canada. Okay, TransCanada will be running that project. It will send that oil down to Texas, where it will be refined and then shipped overseas. Tar sands oil is not sweet Louisiana crude. It's very, very caustic. This pipe broke because after so long, that really, really gritty pipe, which isn't cleaned up until it gets to the other end, it isn't processed or any of that, it wore away the inside of the pipe, causing a hole, which then caused a breakage, and then it just went everywhere. Okay? Tesoro released a statement saying that they care about the environment, they really, really want to clean this up, but the North Dakota Petroleum Council President Ron Ness said, you know what, these things happen, so he couldn't be bothered with it. The Koch brothers are funding, which is Charles and David Koch, of Koch Industries, they're funding a lot of the groups right now that are pushing for the Keystone XL pipeline. It's estimated that if the Keystone XL pipeline goes through, not only do you and I get to worry about that pipeline going across the United States, potentially breaking from that incredibly caustic oil that's going to be running through it, but these guys will make $100 billion off of it. Right now, the Koch brothers are, I believe, the fourth and fifth richest guys in the world right now, at $36 and $37 billion. I mean, if you combine their wealth, they are the richest together, but separately, they're 4 and 5. Okay, so if they make $100 billion off of this pipeline, and they will if it gets built, they will more than double their net worth. The Keystone XL pipeline, ladies and gentlemen, is not about us. It's about them. We will deal with the fallout. We will deal with the spilt oil. You and I will pay for the cleanup. They will take their money and go home. We got to keep fighting against this pipeline. Oil is old energy, and we need to get away from it. And we're working towards those ends now. And we've been working more and more towards those ends since gasoline went over $3 a gallon. Seemed to do that relatively quickly. I remember gasoline being just over $1 a gallon back in early 2000. And by the time Bush left office, it had already crossed over the $4 mark at one point. Now, that's not necessarily Bush's fault. I'm just giving you a timeline here. But if you think how long it took to get to $1 and then over $1, because we've been using oil in this country since, I think, like the 1900s. If you think about how it went from, pennies to just over $1 in the early 2000, and then from there to now, over $3 a gallon, it's increasing at an insane rate. It's old energy, and we need to get away from it, okay? A little more news for you. Tea Party leader proposes a class action lawsuit against, wait for it, homosexuality. A Tea Party leader and former Baptist pastor who believes that AIDS is God's judgment against LGBT people proposed filing a class action lawsuit against homosexuality. At a Tea Party event LGBT activist Peter LaBarbera told group chairman Rick Scarborough that Fox News should be pushed to cover these wonderful stories of happy men and women who have left the homosexual lifestyle like they covered African American conservatives. Scarborough, however, had a different plan for fighting what Labera had called the pro-gay thing. Peter, the whole issue of a class action lawsuit, you and I have talked about this a little bit, Scarborough pointed out. I just wonder if you've explored that. Talk to anyone about it. The former Baptist pastor opined that homosexuality much more likely leads to AIDS than smoking leads to cancer. And yet, the entire nation has rejected smoking. Billions of dollars are put into a trust fund to help cancer victims, and the tobacco industry was held accountable for that. Yeah, I think that's great, LaBarbera agreed. I would love to see it. We've always wanted to see one of the kids in high school who was counseled by an official school counselor just to be gay. Then he comes down with HIV. But we never really got the client for that. So, yeah. The homophobia is just insane. So let's file a lawsuit against homosexuality. Ladies and gentlemen, we will watch this insane story and bring more to you if we have any updates. But holy crap, I some of this stuff isn't. If I weren't able to source it, like usually these kind of things happen and they travel as news by rumor. No, there's more than enough credible news organizations that are reporting this, and that's This Week in the Tea Party. All right, so let's go to this. I want to dip into some good news, some of the things that made me smile this week, and hopefully they will make you smile as well. The League of the South is a neo-Confederate hate group whose goal is to secede from the United States and form a new confederacy, reclaiming the Southeast by its quote-unquote Anglo-Celtic roots. These people stood in a crowd in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, to protest what they call the demographic displacement of white Protestants, wielding signs with slogans like, "It's wrong to replace us," and "No jihad in Tennessee." You might think that this kind of hate would fly in Murfreesboro, which was the center of a huge controversy when local Muslims sought to permit to build a mosque in the city. The beautiful thing was that even Murfreesboro won't give an ounce of support to these kinds of people. We, the good guys, who came to counter-protest the hate group's demonstration, outnumbered them tremendously, one man said. We stood with signs, slogans like, "Honk if you love diversity," "Tennessee is for everyone, not in our state," and "One tree, many roots." Also, hashtag, "My jihad is to love even in the face of hate." While my 5-year-old daughter held a sign that she crafted herself that said, "Love is really great." Hundreds of cars passed. They waved at us, honked their horns, shouted in agreement, waved peace signs. Meanwhile, the pathetic activists in the hate group huddled together like frightened bunnies, voiceless, outnumbered, weak. I only saw one person wave to them in expression of support. One out of hundreds. Only one of the members dared to come speak with us about his opinions. The group itself had shouted their consensus, quote unquote, "We don't talk to commie scum." That seems to be the standard answer for everything. Sorry, back to the article. "We're all Southerners, black, white, brown, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, immigrant, and native. And no matter how hard hate groups may try to stake their claim to Southern land as their own, hate is something we have seen too much of, and we can't stand for it anymore." Shortly before we left the rally, my kindergarten-age kiddo asked if she could say something to the members of the hate group. I held a megaphone in front of her tiny mouth, and she yelled, "You guys should be nicer," out of the mouths of babes. To them, there is nothing more dangerous than Southerners who don't stand for hate. There's nothing more fierce than a child who knows and loves that we are equal members of the human family. If you want to read the full article, it is over at addictinginfo.org, authored by Juniper Russell. That just made me smile. Of course, I'm raising my children much the same way. Hate is wrong. Okay? I hate to say this, but I've got more good news. And if if you think there's something wrong with me, you just go ahead and you think that. But this, even though it should not have, made me smile a little bit. A Florida racist was erecting a burning cross and set himself on fire, resulting in second-degree burns over 50% of his body. According to neighbors, Ron Nielsen, 50, of Palm Bay, was erecting the display with his wife when he lit himself on fire by accident, said Yvonne Martinez of the Palm Bay Police Department. Nielsen was apparently carrying the cross and some candles onto his lawn when the incident occurred. We don't know if he was trying to light the cross or the candles. When he did, though, his clothes caught fire. These were what the Ku Klux Klan left in the yards of African-American families in the Deep South in the past, okay? This is a cruel, hideous display by a racist gone wrong, or in the eyes of people who see it for what it was, what has gone right. Police are still investigating the scene where the burning cross injured its owner. A fire marshal told Martinez that the area was not properly ventilated. When Nielsen poured gasoline onto the materials, he caught fire, burning his midsection. He was then airlifted to Orlando Regional Medical Center's burn unit. Had this guy, Ron Nielsen, age 50, had he run into a burning building to save somebody, and he gets second-degree burns over half his body, that man is a hero. And he will walk around with those scars for the rest of his life, but what he did for a heroic reason. This guy was erecting a burning cross. Ladies and gentlemen, although you cannot see it, I'm weeping for him right now. I'm also lying to you. More good news. A man dressed as Jesus Christ arrived to protest anti-gay protesters at the AIDS Walk in Los Angeles. Some might call it an act of divine intervention. On Sunday, October 13th, tens of thousands of people joined the AIDS Walk, LA Benefiting AIDS Project, to raise money for HIV/AIDS prevention, treatment, and awareness programs, CBS LA reported. Despite the outpouring of support, a handful of people showed up to protest the goodwill effort with anti-gay rhetoric. Cordy noted the protesters were armed with homophobic signs reading, well, homo, sex is a sin, warning, sodomites, fags, dykes, homos, fairies, lesbos, queers, fudge packers, muff divers, perverts, hell awaits you. Oh yeah, these were the classy ones. In the midst of the picketing, a man dressed like Jesus in a white tunic and a full beard arrived to challenge the protesters. He stood alongside the hate mongers on the sidewalk while carrying a bunch of red balloons. You can see the pictures of this over at the Huffington Post. It really is a sight to see. It was kind of amazing seeing Jesus posting with a cluster of red balloons early on in the LA AIDS Walk, just after the masses turned off of Santa Monica down La Cienega. Writer Brody Brown, who snapped the photos sent to the Huffington Post, said in an email Sunday, Cordy identified the Jesus impersonator as Kevin Lee Light. Light reportedly then joined the AIDS Walk LA March and posted videos of the crowd on his Instagram. The AIDS Walk began in 1984 during the AIDS epidemic. According to the AIDS Walk website, the first LA Walk surpassed expectations to raise over $670,000 and drew a crowd of 4,500. It has continued to grow ever since, attracting support from celebrity political figures and community leaders alike. This year, Richard Simmons, Wayne Brady, Corbin Bleu, and LA Mayor Eric Garcetti joined the effort, according to the LA Times. So while some folks are crowing about how great it is that AIDS is killing our gay brothers and sisters, the rest of us are not happy about that. And it's not a gay disease. It's not just killing gay people. It's killing a lot of people. And some of us are trying to be part of the solution while the rest of us are cheering for AIDS to kill even more people. So much of the ideology on the right that is expressed into the open air, the same open air that we all share, is becoming more and more poisonous. Luckily, we have a leader who has been speaking out more and more against such hate. He's been getting more and more press. And I'm, of course, talking about Pope Francis. When the Catholic leader picks a new pope, and since I began paying attention, they've changed popes twice. Okay, the first one died, and then the second one resigned for the first time in like 500 years of the papacy, which I think is pretty amazing. But Pope Francis is continuing to make headlines for very good reason. And this week was no exception. Pope Francis continues to push for evolution in the Catholic Church, much to the delight of progressive and liberal believers who fear that neoconservatism ideologues are driving folks away from the church. As Tea Party politicians continue to push exclusionary platforms while wrapping themselves in American flags and pious fortitude, the Pope's message should land as a stern warning. At a morning mass last Thursday, he warned that ideologues are not true Christians and can make them hostile. I quote, "Ideology does not beckon. In ideology there is not Jesus. In his tenderness, his love, his meekness. And ideologies are rigid. Always. The faith becomes ideology, and ideology frightens. Ideology chases away the people, distances the people, and distances the church of the people. But it is a serious illness, this, of ideological Christians. It is an illness, but it is not new, eh? The church, in my opinion, will never be the same. So this brings me to my final thought. And I want to sum it up like this. We are all in this together. Obviously, we all have differences. We all lean one way or the other on so many issues. I believe that very, very few of us are actually hardliners, though, or what could be referred to as hardliners. I believe that if you're conservative, you do hold some liberal positions. And if you're a liberal, you do hold some conservative positions. Even this radio host does. So when you say that your way is the right way and the only way, it's one of the few times you will hear me say to someone who's expressing their opinion, you're wrong. There is not one way to do things. And no matter how badly you believe in your way of doing things, you cannot force the rest of us to believe it. You cannot tell us that it is the one and only way, and you cannot shut down the federal government to get your way. Had the Tea Party succeeded in shutting down the federal government, even they would have suffered immensely. The largest difference, I think, with respect to government between those on the left side of the aisle and those on the right side of the aisle is the left side of the aisle is willing to admit that the government does have a responsibility. The government does do some good. And on the right side of the aisle, they ignore the fact that they use the internet, which, by the way, was created by the government. They forget about the fact that they drive on public streets, that they get their power and phone lines through lines that were set up by the government. They forget about air, water, food inspection. They, on the right side of the aisle, just like to pretend that they don't use the government. But they do. And when you are so ideologically rigid, you're not doing anybody any favors, up to and including yourself. No matter what solution we come up with in the government or in anything else in our lives, it will affect us all the same. We are not black and white and male and female when it comes to things like that. We're all in this together, and we will all be affected equally. We shouldn't be writing laws that discriminate. We shouldn't be writing laws that encourage hate. We shouldn't be writing laws that give all of our country's resources to those at the top and tell those at the bottom, to hell with you. We're all in this together. And as the old saying goes, a rising tide lifts all ships. There's plenty in this country and in this world to go around to everybody. As the old saying goes, there's enough to fill everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. And there's plenty to go around. And when you reach the end of your life, you will be remembered, by and large, for the way you treated people. Not how much money you had, not how much land you had, not how big your house was, not how fancy your car was, not how much jewelry you had. You will be remembered by the way you treated people. And if you're making the argument that the rich should get everything and the poor should get nothing, although you don't see it now, you will eventually. And you will be remembered when you die as cold and hard-hearted. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our country. The United States is our country. It is part of our planet. And we are all in this together. Think about that before you ever execute any action. Think about how what you're going to do is going to affect other people. If we consider the feelings of others, and I know I'm sounding mushy and bleeding heartish right now, but if we consider the way our actions affect others, it will affect our actions, but it will affect them in a positive way. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me for episode 40 of The Fire You Can't Put Out. I want to thank you for your support. We are the fire you can't put out, and we will prevail. I'll catch you next week. Good day.